part of that kind of gives me a sense of I don't deserve any applause for that. Don and I, a few years ago, had been down in Louisville, and we did a Saturday night workshop with Joe Hawk. And it was a small meeting, and that evening, maybe as many people there are, they're just on that side of the room, not counting along the bench. And it lasted maybe 2.5 hours. And when it was over and we got done, we looked at each other and we realized what had just happened in that room could not be done again. It had been that powerful and that wonderful. And we said right there, we're not taking this show on the road because we can't do this again. It was one of those times that when the spirit in the room, was so moving. I never had a light like it. And you can still find a tape of that night, Joe and Don and I, and it was probably 20 years ago or more.
27.
What, you got it? That and all the things he and I've done and Bob's done and all that has never generated the same impact. I think that one did. It was powerful. And later on, not that long ago, maybe a couple of years before he died, he and I were looking at each other, and some people had driven around to see us. We were all in my home in Indiana, and sitting there, and they were asking all these questions like what happened, and we tried to answer. It got quiet for a minute, and I said, Don, why was it the Denver Young People's Group? What was it? And the best answer we could come up was it was just right time, right place. That's what it was. So thanks for the visual to show us kind of what that looks like. Just because sometime last week, my wife asked us. She said, "Do you and the guys ever think about or talk about how many lives have been touched as a result of what came out of there, out of the Denver Young People's Group?" And I said, "No, we really don't think about it. We know it's a lot." Now the truth is, we were touched by guys, Chuck Chamberlain, Cecil Corrigal out of Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, Max, Bob White out of Texas, and all that. And here we were was a bunch of young people in AA. We were together one time down in Texas someplace, and Bob White was there, and he always treated us like we were gold. He called everybody sugar. The biggest, baddest Harley rider in here was still Sugar, and you didn't mess with Bob. Everybody was Sugar. And he came up to us, and he said, "I love it when I see the young people here." And he says, "But it kind of bothers me somehow, because you can hear them from all over the place, and you can see their fire." He says, "I just wish they would learn another words besides fuck." And I don't know about whoever else heard him say that, but coming from you guys, we'd have told you to jump in the lake or worse. But when Bob White said that, you're thinking, boy, maybe we better tone that down. Because he was a man of the Spirit. that keeps us around here. It does that. So that was a nice thing to see. But so I bring that up. So we talked about second step last, as I remember. We had in our little group where we were reading the big book and do it, we got into the discussion about the third step prayer, and we were sharing with it that we read through it. Bob will do a better job of that. I don't take much time here, but we read up to it, and we read the promises of the third step, and understood that they were promises, that. But then when we got down to it, and we were all done talking, got to be a quiet spell, and we really didn't know what to do next. And our friend Lee, and the fellow I've talked about that just turned 52 years sober, lives in Grand Junction, said he had an idea, and he wanted us, the 14 of men that were in that group left, to read/pray that third step prayer together. And he said the reason he wanted to do that was he had been attending several meetings around Denver, and they were inventory meetings, 4-step meetings. And after, you couldn't talk in this meeting apparently unless you'd taken an inventory. And he didn't talk, but he saw other people in there that hadn't talked and shared their experience with an inventory. And he asked them why, and some of them said that because they hadn't taken the third step yet. And Lee wanted us to do it together. So if one of us heard him later say that he hadn't written an inventory yet because he hadn't taken the third step yet, we could call him a damn liar because we saw him do it. And so we must have understood that kind of lingo when we did that. And so we did it. And I think in all candor, I did it because the other 13 guys were doing it. I was very uncomfortable, probably, I was just as uncomfortable being seen praying as doing anything. And back that, all those years ago, it wasn't cool for a room full of boys to hold hands. And so we did that. We read/prayed the third step prayer together. And I was sharing last night how I had felt even while I was coming to believe that a paragraph myself could restore me to sanity, that I still was miserable and I was scared. And so said the prayer, I left the meeting, and I got in the car, and I said another prayer, and I said, God, make that first prayer real. I can't stand this shit much longer. This has been miserable, and I can't do this. Something has got to change. And I meant it. The next night, I went to a different meeting down in Littleton that I didn't normally go to, and I'd made a deal with Julie that it was a 7 o'clock meeting. Back then, most meetings started at 8 or 8:30, and but it was a 7 o'clock meeting, so it meant it was going to be over at 8. And she wanted to attend an 8 o'clock Al-Anon meeting. And so we made a deal that if I would come straight home after the meeting, she would have already gone to her Al-Anon meeting. And so the kids were going to be left alone for 5 or 10 minutes, which was okay. They were old enough for that to happen. And I would come home and tuck them in, go to bed. So I go to this meeting. And during that meeting, the only chair for me to sit at is right next to a big guy named Frank. We called him Big Frank McKibben because he was big and he was very frank. And his name was Frank. But he was intimidating. He was an attorney. He was very big and boisterous. And he could probably hurt you physically, and he could hurt you with words very easily. And I sat down next to him because it was the only chair. And we went to the meeting, and when we all stood up to say the Lord's Prayer at the end of the meeting, and for some reason, Frank and I both sat down again. I don't remember either one of us saying a word. I don't think we did. We sat down right there again. And I said, Frank, I just thought of something. I said, you don't scare me one damn bit anymore. And he reared back like he would on occasion. He'd laugh, and he reached over and he hugged me, and that's when I thought I was going to die. And I got in the car to go home, like I made the deal with Julie. And it's like my fanny wasn't seated in the car. I was driving the car, but I was floating, if you will. And I get home and I go in the house. Julie had left, but she'd put all the kids to bed. So our youngest daughter was in a downstairs bedroom. And she was asleep. So I kissed her goodnight. And I went upstairs. And the two older girls were up there. So I went into the oldest one's room and we chatted for a minute. I kissed her goodnight. Then I went into our middle daughter, Patty's room. And she was laying in there crying. And she was crying because she had been diagnosed with ulcers. And it had her just as a little kid. And her stomach would hurt. And so I asked her if she wanted some milk, and I went down and got her a little glass of milk and brought it up. And I had been working in a place that 3 or 4 of the people that were in this building were tongue-talking Christians where I worked, and they were always talking about laying hands on people to heal them. One of them would play the tambourine down on East Colfax. I think East Colfax needed a tambourine back then. It was the real tenderloin in Denver. And I didn't know what to do. My daughter's crying, and I'm stuck there by myself. And I said to Patty, I said, do you want to pray about your tummy? She said she did. And so I remember holding her hand with one hand and put my other hand on her stomach, and I said a prayer. I have no idea what I said. I don't think I've ever known what I said. I don't remember. But when I opened my eyes and looked down, she was asleep. And I went downstairs and waited for Julie to get home. And it was one of those nights where you just sit and experience the time you've had, not really knowing why. You know you've never had a feeling like that in your body, and it's been a sense that's been with you since Big Frank hugged me. So anyway, now fast forward a few months, and we're all coming home to dinner, and where Bob and I lived in Colorado, the Hispanic community was there first. The Latin Americans that were there first, and Mexican food was just kind of the order of the day there. We ate a lot of it, and still every chance we get, we eat a lot of it. But we're all coming home from school and work, and you walk in the house, and Julia was making some green chili, and when that stuff is cooking, the smell is wonderful. You know, it's just magnificent. And it kind of comes through the house. And the oldest daughter says, "Oh, that looks good, Mom, but what's Patty going to eat? She can't eat that." And Patty said, "I can too. My tummy hadn't hurt for a long time." So do what you want with that story. But I never heard my daughter complain about a tummy ache from that point on. With that now, I had my first conscious effort of inviting God into my life when I said the third step prayer. And I was desperate for it, for some change. And I had a reaction to having said that prayer that was in part immediate and in part lasted all summer. It was some kind. I have never felt like I have reneged on the third step prayer. And I'm not telling you I have behaved like I had just taken the third step prayer every day since then, because I've about done everything wrong you can possibly do without drinking, sober and in AA. But I felt that I made that decision, and I've kept the decision. And when I would go out and misbehave and do some of those other things, It wasn't the prayer's fault. It was a whole different deal. I love it when we read the third step prayer. I love it when I say it together with other people. Some of the guys will call me with 10th steps, but they want to say the third step prayer before we do it over the phone. And I love that. And so that's not only a big prayer in my life, it's a big symbol in my life. And I'm not all that enthralled by different symbols and things, but that's really been important to me. So thank you.
The first time I took the third step prayer, I didn't want to take it. That was when we were all together in a group and we were going to stand or get on our knees and hold hands and say the third step prayer together. And I'd read the prayer and I didn't like the deal. And so Don said, are you going to do this? And I said, I'm going to do it, but I don't want to do it. And so anyway, we all did that. And afterwards, Pritz looked at me and he started laughing and he said, why was it that you didn't want to say that prayer? And I said, I just don't like the deal. I don't know what he's up to. I just agreed to anything he wanted to do, and I don't even know what it is. And he said, so why were you afraid? And I said, I didn't want to give God that kind of power in my life. And he said, Bob, God's got all the power anyway. You aren't giving him shit. He said this exercise, third step prayer, is an exercise in who's God and who's the drunk. Now, let me tell you something. I'll give you an exercise that you may or may not want to do, but I wanted to. In the big book, there's a comment in there, it's in the third step, where it says, knowing that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to Him. And I'm looking at that, and I'm probably 4 years sober, 5 years sober, and going back through the work, and was going to get on my knees and hold somebody's hands and say the third step prayer. And I thought, what does abandon ourselves utterly actually mean? Now, I know about abandon. I mean, I was on a ship in the Navy, and abandon ship's an important exercise if you want to survive the experience. And so, I mean, I know that it means to get off and get away. And so, what it really means in a spiritual sense is get out of self. Abandon ourselves to God. So I thought, how do you do that utterly? And my first experience, obviously, was that I was afraid of what God was going to do if I agreed to it. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to abandon myself utterly, I'm going to put everything on the altar. My life, my health, my relationships, my money, everything. I'm going to put it all on the altar and see what He does. Well, you know, the Big Book makes a big thing out of trusting God. What do you suppose He'd do if I agree to everything up to and including killing me right on the spot? Think He'd do it? Do you have the courage to do that? Do you have the courage to virtually put everything on the line and make it available to God's will. I've done it for years. Now, you want to learn how to trust God? Tell him he can do anything he wants. Anything. Anything. And see what happens. And if you don't have the courage to do that, I understand, but you really have nothing to fear. So when I take the third step today, and I say the third step prayer, I mean everything. And you know what? I've lived 40-some years longer than I expected to. I have virtually lived a whole extra life. And God has given me in such profusion during that period that I don't understand why my mind will continue to doubt him. Now, I understand when I say the third step prayer, if I say whatever you've got in mind is all right. Take me where you want me to be, make me into what you want me to be, do whatever you have in mind, that it's going to be better than anything that I could have conjured up. Now, look, if you're going to make an adventure out of a spiritual life, see what its limits are. Go test it. Say, God, I don't know what you got in mind for me, but whatever you got in mind's good. Just kind of try to keep me informed in the process if you can. So that's my experience today. There are two places in the steps where I virtually put everything on the altar. One of them is in the third step prayer, and the other one's in the seventh step prayer. I'm not afraid of God anymore. So if you have doubts or you think that God is punitive or punishing or whatever you think, this is as good a time as any to change your mind about who God is. My experience is that God is not only helpful, but he's gentle. Except every once in a while when I just have to change my mind. And then God's going to change it whether I like it or not. And, I understand it because it always takes me to a better place, but it doesn't mean I like it anymore. So I have had two experiences over time with the third step prayer, or with the third step. One of them was I was afraid of the outcome, and the other one is I'm all right with whatever he's got in mind. If you want to find out if you really trust God, do that. It's a good exercise. And then, see, we'll sit there and expect God to do something terrible to us because we agreed. Never happened. See what happens. Test. When you see something in the book, test it. See if it works. See what the outcome is. Follow the directions and see what the net result is. My experience with that is you will be happily amazed at the outcome, but it's going to take some courage for you to do it. So suck it up and follow the directions. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Want to talk about inventory?
Yep.
Good stuff.
You going to start?
Huh?
You starting or am I?
You can, right? That's fine.
I shouldn't have started on those damn peanuts. Just kind of to move on just a little bit further here. At this point, we were faced with writing an inventory. And I don't know what the other guys were doing, but I was avoiding it pretty clearly. And I just wasn't doing anything on it. I don't remember thinking much about it at all. And there was a man in the Denver Young People's group that he and I didn't like each other particularly much. We didn't have any particular reason for it. That we just both came from a background where we didn't like the other guy. And his name is Ernie, and he'd come from a Hispanic background down in southern Colorado, and I'd come from a non-Hispanic background 100 miles the other direction. And we met in Denver. And so we were just always uncomfortable with each other, and we were going to the meeting together. And the meeting back then, back in there in the early 70s, was back the time that we were learning to hug in AA. Anything beyond the handshake before that, I don't remember anybody hugging. But hugging the girls was really nice. I thought that was great. But well, you know, back in the 70s, it was love, sex, and rock and roll, or drug, sex, and rock and roll. I got it right that time. And so the meetings are going on, and we're going to the meeting. Ernie and I would walk into a meeting, and all the hugging would be going on, and we'd see each other, and we'd just give each other the peace sign. The problem is Ernie's missing this finger. And that was only one reason I didn't like him. But Ernie disappeared for a while, and he'd been gone for a couple of weeks, and people were saying, "Where's Ernie?" And I'm saying or thinking, "Don't knock it, he's gone." And then one day he came back, and he came into the room, and there was something different about him. And it was, you could see it. You could look him in the eyes, and it's like there was somebody home, and I hadn't seen anybody there before, and he was more alive than I'd seen. And when it came his turn to talk, he explained that he had gotten into a beef with his wife about something, and he'd run away from home. And he ran down to Lake Whitney, Texas, and looked up Bob White, who I mentioned here a bit ago, for help. And Bob took him to a cabin down on Lake Whitney there, an old fishing camp. Put him in a room there with a big book and a pad and a pencil, and showed him how to write an inventory. And a day or so later, Ernie came out of that with this 3-ring binder and went and found Bob. And Bob says, well, let's go out in the middle of the lake. And they get in the big boat, and they get out in the middle of the lake. And Ernie thinks he's going fishing when Bob turns the key to the boat off and says, "What's in that inventory?" And Ernie can't swim. And so he took a fifth step. And anyway, the bottom line of that was he showed up the following meeting night, and something had changed. And he told him that experience of what had happened to him. But it was physical. You could see there had been really something profound that had happened to him. So I went home that night, and I started my first inventory. I assume I got home that night somewhere around 10 o'clock. I took my book and my pad and my pencil out, and I listed those resentments that I knew were there already. I wasn't seeking for those. Those had been really irritating me for quite a while, and I listed those and got them through the columns as best as I could do with that. And somewhere about sunup, I didn't seem to have any more to write, and so I stopped. I'm going to jump ahead just here a little bit, but shortly after that, I ended up going to a little quarterly AA conference in the southeast corner of Colorado. and it was a quarterly area assembly. Back then it was a state assembly. They weren't the areas yet. And I ended up having a room with Ernie, and he listened to my first fifth step too. So I ended up, he was on it, on the inventory, and a bunch of other people he knew was on it. And I took my first fifth step with him. A few years later, and some inventories later, I ended up moving to Indianapolis. And when I got there, I didn't realize how much trouble I'd been in. I got recruited out there by an AA member, and something should have told me then that's generally not a good idea. But I got to Indianapolis, and it was a much smaller city. At that point, probably in 1977, it might have been 500,000 people. And there were 50 meetings a week in that, and 49 of them were speaker meetings. And I'm the new guy in town, and got a big ego, and I'll go talk anywhere I'm asked, and they're always glad to see a stranger in town, so it wasn't long I'd talk at most of those meetings. And I shared my story of us going through the steps as far as I had gone, but then I would stop talking about it because I hadn't done any more on the steps. I hadn't even gone through 6 and 7. And in a short time later, I was doing about everything wrong in AA except going back out and drinking. It can be done. Fidelity was a long thing that had gone away a long time before that. I wasn't paying my bills. I was in serious trouble. And a day came that I really knew it. And I needed to get some help. There was a man in Chicago that I had known about in AA. I had met him twice, and he was a friend of Frank's, Big Frank's. And I called him up in Chicago, and I'd been talking to him a little bit, but this time I called him and I knew something had to change. And I started the remark with my conversation with him and said, is there any possibility that a 46 or whatever I was, 47-year-old alcoholic with about 20 years of sobriety, a grandfather, could be going through male menopause? And he said, well, maybe. He says, but I think if you review your first 3 steps, write another inventory, come up here and take some 5th steps and make your amends, your life will change and it'll be dramatic. So I said, I'll do anything you ask. And I believe at that point I couldn't have given a more honest answer. I was that desperate again, only maybe more so. And so I did. And so I called him the weekend, and then I called him on Thursday night, and I had written a whole new inventory. And the first column was all current stuff. My resentments were all current. That might want to scare you, because that tells you that stone sober I can cause as much harm as I ever did when I was drinking. And I'd taken those through the 4 columns. And then my fear inventory was like a lot of fear inventories. There seemed to be repeated fears there that are on that, and I did all I could do with that. Then when I got to the conduct inventory, the sex inventory, I'll just throw this out right now while I'm thinking about it. When you're writing your inventory and you're at your sex inventory, you might want to think about those relationships that where sex was not involved, but that it was certainly a relationship, and look at your conduct there, because there's 9 questions we can ask around the sex inventory, isn't it? The most profound one is was it selfish or not? Was I there? Of course it was. So I went on back through my life at that point, and I tried to remember everybody that I had been involved with in that particular life with that. And I asked those 9 questions about each one of those people, and I'd done a great job with it. And I was that. And that was, I had written many other inventories when I was taking people through the steps before then. But that was probably the most complete thing I had done up until that point in my life. That first inventory that I took, all they did was save my ass. But later inventories were much more insightful, probably more honest. And I discovered more and more stuff in those as I went along than I ever did in that first one. But the first one was really critical. And it really was. Go ahead.
So let's just review a little something about inventory. There are three parts to an inventory: resentment, fears, and sex. In the resentment inventory, it asks you to write about people, institutions, and principles. In the first column, you put the person, the institution, or the belief. In the second column, you put the cause. In the third column, you talk about what it affects: self-esteem, security, ambitions, personal relations, sex relations. Some people write pocketbook, and some people even write about pride. And then you go back through the inventory and you write a column about where you're selfish, where you're dishonest, where you're self-seeking, and where you're frightened. The fear inventory has two questions in it. Wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? And why did we have them? And then the sex inventory has the questions that Gary was referring to. Starting with, was it selfish or not? Now, is there anybody in here who's never written inventory? Three, yeah. Get together with a sponsor in a big book. There are examples in the big book about how to write it. But I am reluctant to not tell you, or I'm reluctant to miss something that was so important to me. If you don't mind, I'm going to talk.
Do it.
I was 28 years sober. I had written inventory every year. Every year. I'd gone through all 12 steps every year. I was for 28 years. And I was doing my 11th step. At night, and I was reviewing my day, and I was asking God, I just ask God questions. I don't expect answers. I mean, when I'm doing that, I just say, God, how come this is going on? And I think at some point, it may occur to me what the problem is. And I said, how come after all these years and all this inventory and all this step work and all the rest of that, how come I still believe that if people really knew me, they wouldn't like me? How come I believe that I'll never amount to anything? How come I believe that any woman who would be interested in me belongs in a mental institution? How come I believe that I'll never be financially successful? How come I believe that I'm not smart enough to really be successful financially and in every other sense. How come I believe that I'm just a thug? I mean, some of this stuff, I was already extremely successful in business when I was 28 years old, and so I'm believing that I still can't be a success in business, and it flies in the face of reality, and I chose to continue to believe that, even though I already was. So what did I find out? What did I find out? I found out that everyone I have ever met in Alcoholics Anonymous comes into the program with a head full of nonsense about who and what they are. And I got to tell you something. If you're going to drag that shit around for the rest of your life, it's going to make it miserable, because it's all lies. Well, I told you that I provide psychiatric care for the Department of Corrections. I started hearing voices. That's not a good sign. That's happened to me twice. Once I was coming home from Tampa, and the voice said, "You're done." And I knew that what it was I was done with going and speaking at conventions. And the reason why was because I wanted to coach my kids in Little League soccer, and I wanted to repair my marriage. And just as a matter of information, we won the championship in Little League soccer, and I got divorced. So, I don't... Everything in life is a stepping stone to something else. None of those are the last step. They're just one more step on the road. So this time, I'm sitting there and asking God why I believe all this stuff after I'd been sober for so long and been through the steps so often. And what I heard was principles. And on it, so I started answering the voice and said, what the hell do principles have to do with it? And, principles are honesty, open-mindedness, willingness, stuff like that. And what I heard was, no, they're not. They're those beliefs that you hold so deeply that they have become part of your personality. Those beliefs have become sacrosanct. That means you don't even challenge them anymore. And half of what you believe is self-defeating. And I said, well, what do I do with that? And what I heard was, write an inventory. So I said, good, what do I do? How do I do that? And I heard, put the belief in the first column. So I wrote in the first column, if you really knew me, you wouldn't like me. You know that even gangsters avoided me when I was doing all the bad stuff? I mean, they didn't want to be around me because they thought something ugly was going to happen to them. So I wrote down, if you really knew me, you wouldn't like me. And then I said, what about second column? And so help me, I heard open your book. And I picked up my big book, and I looked on top of this second column, and it says the cause. So I thought, what caused me to believe that? And it was when I was like 10, 12 years old, adults were saying to me, Jesus, your dad's a chronic alcoholic, your mother's kind of a loony, and in and out of mental institutions, and you got no chance at all. So I thought, well, why would anybody like me? If if the only things that can happen to me are bad. And I assumed I had no value. And that's why I became a criminal. Because I thought, screw it. If I'm going to be out there in the open, I'll make goddamn sure I get what I want. And the rest of you can go to hell in a handbasket as far as I'm concerned. And so I wrote down, I was told as a kid that I had no value. And I went in the third column and asked myself, does that affect my self-esteem? Well, Jesus, it destroys it. Does it affect my security? How could I be secure in anything if nobody's going to like you? How can you be secure? Can't be secure in a job. Can't be secure in a friendship. Can't be secure in a relationship. Can't be secure in anything. Can't get financially secure. Can't get secure at all. How are you ever going to be secure? What about ambitions? Does it affect them? Why would you have any? If everybody's going to run away, you can't get close to them. I mean, if my ambitions are to be successful in life and business or relationships or whatever the hell is, if everybody runs, ain't going to happen. How about personal relations? How are you going to have any? What about sex relations? You know, sex relations are just personal relations on steroids. How the hell are you going to get in a long-term relationship with some partner because at some point they're going to go, I didn't know you were like that. And they're going to haul ass. So I went over in the fourth column and I said, why am I selfish in believing this? And I said, because I know it's a lie. I just don't want to go through all the trouble of disbelieving it. That's the truth. You know, the truth about all that was I was surrounded by friends. I'm nervous around people who want to be my friends. I don't think they have any taste at all. So that's not really true. I actually think they have wonderful taste. But I asked myself why it was selfish to believe that. And it was only because I didn't want to go through all the trouble of changing my mind. Why was it dishonest to believe that? Because it was a lie. I was surrounded by friends. They made me nervous as hell. I think that that if you're going to be somebody's friends, that it requires a certain amount of work on your part to maintain the friendship. Why is it self-seeking? Because it allowed me to be a victim. Because I could say, well, hell, nobody's going to stick around. So, I mean, if I'm an abject failure in everything I do, that's the reason. And I can justify every failure by believing that. And why was I frightened? Because I thought it might be the truth. Because at one point in my life, people did run from me. I wrote an inventory. I'm being too old to date. I mean, at the time I wrote that inventory, I don't know what I was. I was probably around 70. And I Actually, that would have been in my late 60s. And I wrote an inventory. Let me tell you something. I had one question to the inventory at the end of the third column. And the question is, and the only reason why I write it down is so I see the reality of it. The question is this a lie? And everything that I have ever written that will diminish us as a person is a lie. Take my word for it. And here's what you find out. I'll tell you what the bottom line is in this inventory so you don't have to be afraid of what you find. The bottom line in this inventory is I am a child of God and an equal to anyone. I'm no better and no worse than anyone else, but I am an equal. And God made me with a special set of skills and abilities, and He did it with something in mind, and He did exactly the same thing for you. And our job in life is to figure out where those skills and abilities lie in order to do God's work. I'm not a thug. Jesus, I am the biggest cupcake you ever met. And I'm probably the only guy that you know that ever punched out somebody in an AA meeting. But he should have shut up. Here's what you know that in order to become alcoholics, to have a seat in a place like this, that it's almost imperative that you go down some muddy roads. All right? In the process of going down those muddy roads, you will have had some experience which will lead you to believe that you might be damaged goods, or that you might be a second-class citizen, or that you may be less than someone else. Let me put that bullshit to rest. You are not less than someone else. You are an equal to anyone else. And the only thing that prevents you from acting like that is what's floating around between your ears. You know, I've been talking to you a lot about courage. Do you have the courage to change your mind? Do you have the courage to put everything on the altar? Do you have the courage to practice these things as closely as they're written? You willing to go look for the truth? I got to tell you, it changed my life. I was 28 years sober, and all of a sudden I didn't have to believe any of that bullshit anymore. And what I found out was I work hard at living I call it living a life that's pleasing to God. Okay, I'll get on the plane in the middle of the night and go to fucking Atlanta. Because I want you to know this. I don't want you dragging your ass around for the rest of your life believing bullshit about who you are. You are a child of God, and it's about damn time that you started acting like one, but you may have to change your mind about some stuff first. I don't know how to put that in any stronger terms. there were times when I didn't even want to go to AA meetings, because I'd walk in there and people would start talking about themselves in the most disparaging terms. And they would describe themselves. When people talk in AA meetings, they're always talking about themselves. And so people would get up and they'd talk about themselves, and they'd talk about what a piece of shit they were. And you'd look at them and you'd say, wait a minute, that's a bright, articulate person, and what they're describing is not what I see. I see a child of God with all the skills in the world to make them whatever they want to be, but their own beliefs will prevent them from even trying. Because the problem with having a belief like that is that they will absolutely scare you to death, and you'll think that if you try something, you'll fail at it and you'll be ridiculed. Screw it. Suck it up and do something. Jesus. So here's the deal. Everybody in the room has this stuff. And it will act as an impediment in your life, and it will prevent you from becoming the person that you can be, and especially the person you would like to be. And even more important, the person that God intended you to be. So it's time to clear all the bad stuff out. And writing this kind of inventory will help you do that and help you change your mind about who you are if you have the courage to do it. There, did you ever hear anything like this in a meeting before? Well, tough shit. It just, please do something about it, because it will change your life. And I think that we deserve to know. Inventory. When you write inventory, it's not about finding the truth. When you write inventory, it's about finding the lie. And this is how you attack the lies directly. There, now I'll get off the box.
I found it helpful looking at it, rereading one day, or maybe I heard somebody reading the first portion of the 5th chapter, where Wilson tells us to let go of our old ideas. Pritz used to talk about letting go of all of our old ideas, the good ones and the bad ones. Sometimes we don't know the difference, so just let go of all of them. But I think the principles we're talking about here are old ideas that we live by. And I was listening, sitting in my home group this past Tuesday night. And one of the guys that's on fire right now that has really struggled to get here, been to prison twice, he's just had a hell of a time. And you wouldn't believe it's the same guy. Today, looking at him, and he's 2 years sober, and he just really got it going, and he was sharing an experience with principles inventory. And particularly the one that says, I'm too stupid. And he, when he said that, I watched a couple of heads turn in the room. And I think the guy sitting in front of me, I sponsored for a long time. He's got 30 plus years of sobriety. He got sober very young, younger than I did. With that, he's got a very responsible position in a well-known university. And I just tapped him on the back of the head to get to writing this, because he was with Bob and I. This was last summer, wasn't it? Yeah, in Illinois. And he was bound and determined then he was going to sit down and write that principles inventory. So I get the opportunity to get after a long-time sober pigeon, and it's really fun, but I think he takes it out on the next guys. Any questions? Any thoughts? Any notes? Sure.
So, when you wrote that inventory, Bob, what
I'll have
was
to
the
repeat it.
defining moment? How did you see the lie and actually change? What was the moment that you saw it on paper and you said, "It's a lie. I can let it go"?
The first time that I wrote that, and I was writing the first one about if you really knew me, you wouldn't like me. And I looked at how that affected my self-esteem, I almost fell out of my chair. Because I saw what it had done to what I believed. And I thought, oh my God, this whole thing is based on a lie. And I've been believing it forever. One of the most common things that is said to someone coming out of inventory is, I can't believe what I believe. And I saw how it affected my self-esteem, and that had such a profound effect on me over time, over decades, that I thought, oh my God, how could this have happened? Am I totally stupid or what? And see, we all do it. We get these ideas and we just don't challenge them. And especially if we're told this stuff as children. Because then it adds all those years to cement itself into your personality. And so I found out, I was embarrassed as hell after I wrote that first one. Because I thought, I've been believing lies all my life. And every time I'm given an opportunity, those lies will try and defeat it. I go, well, I can't do that. I got to tell you, when the Department of Corrections asked me to start providing them with psychiatric care, my goddamn head almost exploded. And I thought, I'm the guy they were sending to psychiatrists. You want me to do that? And see, that's what my head is saying, but what my mouth said is, let me look into it. And I went out and found psychiatrists and found that they wanted to work for me because I paid them faster and in larger quantities. If you had asked me a month before whether I could ever be providing psychiatric care, I would have told you bumped your head too hard. So when was the moment? When I asked if it affected my self-esteem, because it came down like a house of cards. That I had a head full of nonsense about who I was, and it was about goddamn time that it all changed. And that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life believing lies about who and what I am. I like myself today. I do. I think I'm a pretty nice person. I will go out of my way to help people. And I've got a lot of experience. So that can be helpful. In some specific things. People will come up and go, geez, I've got this girlfriend and, we got this going on, and what would you do under those circumstances? There's a pretty good chance I've experienced that before. Because, if you've been around almost 80 years, you're going to have a lot of experience. So, the reason why I wanted to tell you that is because it's one of the most profound experiences that I've had in AA.
If someone has run out of steam on inventory for a period of time, should they start over at step one or continue where they left off? Yes. I think you turn to God again and review where you're at, and then pick up an inventory. Written inventory you've already written, and nothing and not been acted on tends to fester. So those of you who might be working on an inventory, or maybe you have some inventory you've walked off and left, I can promise you it's going to get worse. And so there are often many words, and particularly in the 10th step, about doing things quickly and immediately, and all these things sort of wrapped around inventory. And I think that's important. So get back to it and get it done. Sit down with your sponsor. Get some help.
Do you know why people get a little nuts when they write inventory? Because all you're aware of is the problem. There's an expression in Denver about writing inventory. If you're riding through hell, don't stop. Just, if you're going to write inventory, the best way I've ever found to write inventory is to make a decision to write inventory for an hour and a half or 2 hours every day. And then do everything you can to stick to that schedule. And you will be through it before you know it. But see, if you're just sitting there and writing about all the stuff that you did, and all the bad decisions you made, and all the bad effects from those decisions in this inventory, why wouldn't you be upset, uncomfortable, frustrated? That's what happens when you write inventory. But I will tell you, if your intent is to finish it, that you are protected. But don't be surprised if you write inventory and you get uncomfortable in the middle of it, because it's normal. Excuse me. Thank you. This is like a Nike ad. Just do it. Quit speculating about how this is going to work and what the result is going to be, and just go do it and find out. That's the way to look at that. So, that's it.
I often think we make too big a deal out of inventory. We talk about it, it's a little scary because we're a little afraid to look at what we're really like and all that. That makes sense, doesn't it? But we really make too big a deal of it, I think. Now, here's an old guy that's been around a long time and I have no clue how many inventories I have, but it's been a shitload. But just take your book and sit down and do it. And I hope your sponsor has experience with inventory, because that can really be helpful. With that, I've had opportunities where recent opportunities where somebody I'm working with in inventory, and they're getting stumped, and I'll ask them to drop by and we'll help them get it going. But it's not an intellectual discussion. When he comes over and he sits down, I have him get his pad and pencil out, and then we'll start the discussion. And with that, it's amazing that our conversation that we reserved an hour for gets answered in 10 or 15 minutes. Any other questions? God, we must have done a hell of a job.
I doubt it. Yeah. You don't have any questions? Go ahead.
down inside, it's still hanging on. And it keeps coming back, and it keeps coming back. And if I can sit, I have dealt with it. How do you force yourself to be honest with everything about life? And I'm honest. I mean, I am to be honest. You know? I mean, it's not like I have anything.
Did everybody hear him? Many of you had that experience, having written about the same thing over and over. He was talking about those times where he's had predominantly a principle, right? I'm too stupid, or whatever it was. And he'll write it, and he's done it 3 or 4 times, but never gotten honest enough to move on with it, I think, is probably the crux of what you were saying. My experience in that is Bob touches it when he saw it, you're looking for the lie. In my case, the first one I wrote was I'm too stupid. And the cause was, I never forgot, and I can still picture my mother. I don't know what I had done, but it probably was stupid. But I was a small kid, and she told me that I must have been hiding behind the door taking a shit when God passed out the brains. And I've been too stupid ever since. And so I put that in the third column. And the second column. And destroyed my self-esteem. We go through the exact same litany that Bob just did with all of that. And it was a lie, and it was apparent to me. Hell, I'd gone through college, did 4 years of college in 3 years, took difficult courses, not rocket science courses, but certainly did well. We kept a family together while I was doing it. The girls started school. All those things were going on, and it's clear that I'm not stupid. So I found the lie. And I did it just the way I did anything else. I take it through the 5th step process. What harm have I caused? I do the whole thing we do with every other inventory. And then maybe a short time after I've asked God to remove it, I'll get a sense of it showing up, but it won't be as strong as it was. And my answer then is, God, I thought we took care of that. Because I do that. I can't remove that. And so our mistake is generally later on, and we're not there yet. When we're looking at 6 and 7 and all that, that doesn't mean I am removing any defects. I am unable to do that. I do not have that power. So I took you through that litany just to get you there. You're just not there yet. Maybe you need to do it again. Make sure you get the 5th step and get the things in order. In fact, I would suggest that. But go on through with it. Got more steps to do. But I certainly relate. You ain't the only guy that's done that. If there's no more questions, we just as well knock off and eat in 10 minutes. Oh, it's 6. Well, this said 5. You're lying to us. Or we can go on. Which would you rather do?
Let's get on. Go on. Can you just go ahead and cover 5, 6, 7?
Works for me.
Well, we need to talk about. Well, no, we don't have to talk about fear, and
We just did it.
Yeah. Whatever, I don't care.
You want to go on with 5, 6, and 7 before dinner? Does anybody want a 10-minute break first? All right, be back at 5 o'clock.